Welcome back to Venture Together, the podcast where we discuss various scriptures and topics in order to help you in your walk with Jesus Christ. Be sure to grab your Bible and let's dive in. Welcome back to Venture Together. My name is Josh, the host of the show. So glad that you're able to join us today, whether that's on Apple or Spotify or even watching the video on YouTube. Any of those ways you can join us today, and certainly hope that you will. Glad that you're here and hope you enjoy the episode that we have lined up for you today. We've got a special guest for you and a good conversation that I'm looking forward to having. A missionary that our church supports, a missionary that I was able to go visit actually in his field and get to be able to see firsthand somewhat of what the ministry looks like there. And so let me bring him into the show here. This is Andrew Cummings with Baptist Mid Missions.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad that you're able to do it.
It's good to be here.
So just a quick overview, you are serving in the São Luís area of Brazil. So
Right.
just wanted to start by giving you an opportunity to share a little bit more about who you are, your background, and how the Lord has led you to where you are.
Sure. Well. First of all, thanks for having me. And I like doing this kind of thing, and so I don't get to do it too often, but I really enjoy it, and so I appreciate the invitation. I figured you mentioned we're in São Luís. São Luís is not really on everybody's radar. You know, when people think of Brazil, they think of São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro or the Amazon River and everything people know about Brazil. So São Luís is a coastal city, and it's south of the Amazon. We're about 100 miles south of the equator, and considerably more south of the Amazon River. But we're in like the bottom. If you remember the maps of the Amazon River from all of those global warming documentaries, the Amazon region, we're like on the bottom rim of the Amazon rainforest. That's where we are. So you can picture, and we're on the coast, so right on the ocean. And so that's where São Luís is. You can go and look it up on a map, SAO, and then Luis, LUIS. So, like Josh said, my name is Andrew Cummings. Last name is spelled Comings. It's the opposite of Goings. That's how we remember it. And I'm a native of upstate New York. I was born in Ithaca, New York, which is famous for Cornell University. And I was born into a pastor's family. So my dad was a pastor. He's retired now, lives in Florida, but for over 40 years, he was a pastor in Baptist churches, and mostly in New York State, but he did pastor one church also in Pennsylvania. And so I grew up in the faith. I made a decision for Christ at a very young age. And also at a young age, God began to try to get a hold of my heart for missions. He began to convict me for missions. I said, try that. What God sets out to do, He does. And so eventually, when I was 17, there was resistance on my part. I really didn't want to go into ministry. I had all kinds of different plans for my life that did not involve ministry. However, when I was 17, my parents sent me on a missions trip to Brazil. I spent 2 months with a missionary who's now one of my colleagues here in Brazil. Spent 2 months with him. And that completely changed my perspective about the world, can change my perspective about God and about ministry. I began to see ministry, and my dad had been trying to project this all along, and Brazil is what finally did the trick. I began to see ministry as something that I could enjoy and something that would be very fulfilling. And God really began to get a hold of me in terms of the necessities of Brazil and so on. So when I was about 17 years old, I finally surrendered. I said, okay, Lord, if you want me to be a missionary, I will be. And then from that point on, there was like never any doubt. It was like, okay, I'm going to the mission field sooner or later. And so then a couple of years later, God opened up the door for me to spend 2 years as we called a mapper, a missionary apprentice. And so I spent 2 years on the mission field in Brazil. I actually spent those 2 years at a Bible college, one of our Bible colleges that we still work with here in Brazil. And I was a student there because I was on a student visa. So I spent 2 years, and I was able to learn the language. I lived in the dormitory with all Brazilians, and so I learned Portuguese fluently in that period of time. And at the end of that time, a young lady came from the city of São Luís to the seminary, and I met her, and we became quite fond of each other. And so one thing led to another, and we started dating at that period of time. I went back to the United States. This would have been 1996. I went back to the U.S. and enrolled at what was then Spurgeon Baptist Bible College in Lakeland, Florida, just outside of Lakeland, Florida, Mulberry, Florida. I graduated there in 2000, and in 2000, that was in May of 2000, I graduated. In June, I was in Brazil, and in July, I got married. And so we were married in 2000. This year, celebrating, if you do the math, 25 years of marriage. And so then after marriage, we came back, lived in the States, worked in our church there in Lakeland, Florida. And then we were commissioned by that church to be missionaries in Brazil. We joined Baptist and Missions in 2002. And then we spent 3 years raising support, and we arrived on the field in 2005. So we've been serving as full-time missionaries in Brazil since 2005. Our first term, which was roughly 5 years, we worked at that same Bible college where we met. And then for the next since then, beginning in 2011, we've worked here in São Luís, and our ministry here right now. We have two main ministries. One is church planting. It's actually a church that we planted back in. We started back in 2012, and we brought it all the way through to where they had a Brazilian pastor. They had two Brazilian pastors, and then the church kind of fell on hard times. And we were planning on going back, but the church called us, and so we accepted the call. So we're back and kind of resuscitating that church. We've been doing that for a year and a half. And then our other ministry is a camp ministry, and Josh has been there, so you have an idea of what the camp ministry looks like there. And we bought that property in 2011, and we've been slowly developing it. We began full-time programs there in 2020, and since then we have programs regularly, and we have regular things that happen every year, and then the churches use it and so on. So both of those things keep us very busy. And we have other things that we do on the side. The Bible Institute here that I teach in and I'm part of the administration of. And we do, I do writing. I'm involved in a local college, secular college, where I'm studying, getting some advanced degrees and so on. Those are kind of things are on the side. So I have my wife. My wife's name, by the way, is Itaciara. She's Brazilian. She's from here in São Luís. And then we have two sons. Our oldest son is Michael. He currently lives in the United States. He's 24. Actually, he'll be visiting us Sunday. He's coming down Sunday, so we're looking forward to that. And then we have our son Nathaniel, who's 17, still lives here. He's about ready to graduate. Turns 18 next month. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell. You have the big overall picture.
There we go, the Brazilian download, so to speak, of
Yes,
what's going
exactly.
on with Andrew Cummings and family.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a lot to go through in a shorter period of time, like you just did. And the ministries.
That was the Reader's Digest version right there.
There we go. And the ministries you talked about, the church plant as well as the camp ministry you made reference to, I've actually been able to go and see both of those in person, which was a really awesome opportunity. And it's just you go and see all that is there opportunity wise on the field. It sometimes you can, from someone like me going to the field and then observing, not necessarily, obviously I wasn't planning on staying. I had to return flight the same week. So, but looking at it from that perspective, it's like, wow, how do you do it? How is it that the Lord's been able to help you and your family keep doing what you're doing for, I think this is 23 years you said?
No, as full-time missionaries, 20 years. It'll
20
be 20
years.
years the
Okay.
end of this year.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
So for 20 years now.
October 28th, 20 years.
Okay. So 20 years this
Yeah.
fall. So how has the Lord helped you and sustained you in this process? Because it has been just so many different things, and the development of the camp ministry, and how that came about, and the Lord kind of put that in your lap. How has He helped you? I mean, there's got to be so many things, but if there's a
Yeah.
way to boil it down, what are some things that maybe you would say that,
Right.
the Lord's done this for us or whatever?
Well, the biggest thing I would say, to put it all into a nutshell, would be that what God calls you to do, He gives you the grace to do, and He enables you to do. And so there were a lot of things and there's no time to go into it, but a lot of things in my growing up that prepared me, that maybe other people didn't have, or that anyway, that God used in special ways that prepared me. So there were a lot of things along those lines. Um, Growing up in a ministry home, I'm not saying you have to grow up in a ministry home to be a missionary, but it helped because I was not shocked or blindsided by things that happen in ministry. Growing up in I'm sorry, having the missionary experience as a young person, and as a single person before I married. So I got my cross cultural training out of the way before I was ever married, which is a big advantage. And I'm not saying I have a lot of colleagues who came down as young couples and learned together and so on. I'm not saying, but in my case, that was a huge help. My language training and so on was all done basically by the time I got here as a full time missionary. So those were sovereign, God working sovereignly in my life to kind of put those pieces in place to allow us to do that. And the other thing is that, like I said, when you're working in ministry and you're overseas and so on, there has to be a sense of divine enabling. Because if you get the idea that I'm on my own on this, or I have to do this in my own strength, just yeah, it's not going to fly. If I had the idea, I'm doing this on my own, and this all depends on my talents and my abilities and my perseverance and so on. Oh, I would get so discouraged. So there has to be that sense of, okay, God called me to do this, and God's going to give me the ability, and and then trust, and also it's kind of a trusting God for the results thing, because you go through periods where things are happening and you're like, yeah, great, and this is when you can write great prayer letters, and then you go through times when things are not going great, and when it comes time to write the prayer letter, you're like, okay, what do I put here, and you have to understand that God is working through a lot of those, and there have been times that people have come up and said, well, such and such a thing you said, or something you did really ministered to my heart, and I'm here, man, that was completely God, because it couldn't have been me, it couldn't have come from me, you know. And so you just stand back and you're like, wow, God did that. That's incredible. And you understand it wasn't me, it was God. You have to have that mentality. If you don't, you'll wash out.
Yeah.
It will be you'll get discouraged, you'll get burnt out, and so on. Uh, I would say, if I could boil it down, I would say that. And I could talk about all day long about you know times God's protected us, times God has divinely appointed things, times God has taught very, very valuable lessons, even through mistakes we made. Those are, I could spend the whole. We don't have time for all of that, so I just try to
Sure.
boil it down into all of the um, in the kind of overall category. And I would say that would be the biggest thing. If you're considering missions, go into it with that mindset, and God will use you.
Yeah. So I know, I think I know the answer to this question, but I guess there's the potential that it could be different person to person. But looking
Mm-hmm.
back at everything that the Lord has brought you through and the opportunities He's given you to take advantage of in Brazil, did you ever think 20 years ago, or even 25, 30 years ago, as a teenager, college student, that you would be doing what you're doing now?
Um, well, yes and no. When, like I said, from 17 years old on, um, I was focused on missions and missions in Brazil because that's the field God had taken me to, and that was where I had my awakening, and God awakened me to the needs of Brazil, and so the needs of Brazil were in my head. And so as I began to think about Brazil, I knew that as I developed in my thinking, at 17 I didn't have this all figured out, but as I developed in my thinking, I knew that the local church is central to Christian ministry. So I knew that a church planting or church supporting role would be essential to what we did. And then I've always been, ever since I was small, I've always been involved in camp ministry. And I saw camp ministry here in Brazil that very first time when I was 17, when I came to Brazil. I saw camp ministry, and I realized, this is something I could get involved in. During that time, I went to 3 different camps here in Brazil. And I thought, what, that's just so, to that extent, camp ministry and church ministry were always we're always in the forefront of my thought. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. That didn't surprise me. What does surprise me is what has surprised me. I guess what has surprised me is that how close what we're actually doing is to what I actually thought we'd be doing. That surprised me. It's not identical, but that has surprised me because and I guess we kind of grow up with this idea of God, don't make any plans because God's going to change all your plans. Well, God does change our plans, and God's plans are always better than ours. But we don't serve a God that's sitting there in heaven going, "Yeah, I'm going to find out what He wants to do, and then tell Him to do the opposite." Like, don't say you're never going to Africa because God will send you to Africa. Have you ever heard that? Well, I got to tell you something. If God does send you to Africa, He will make it the only thing you want to do. Growing up, I didn't want to be in ministry. When I was, growing up as a teenager, I would tell people, your dad's a pastor, you're going to be a pastor. No. When God opened my mind and opened my heart when I was 17, God also changed my desires to the extent that I can't imagine doing anything else. And so God's allowed us to do a lot of the things that were on our heart back in the day. And that amazes me sometimes. It's like, wow, you let me do this. That's cool. And it's just things in several times just kind of plopped into our lap. So we're amazed. Every once in a while, I look over at my wife and say, we're actually doing this. This is so cool. And it's so much fun too. But anyway.
Right. And that kind of plays into something that I think we would even preach, teach, / counsel somebody, and that is that God's designed us and built us with certain gifts and abilities and dreams, desires, and obviously as humans we struggle with the flesh, and so we have to be very discerning. Is what I want here selfish, or is it something that the Lord wants me to do? However, playing into the idea that the Lord gives us these desires to do things that play right into what His will is for our life in service and ministry.
Right. Yeah,
and, yeah. So that's go ahead.
It's the gifts that God's given us and the passions that God's given us, and he wants to bend them to His kingdom, and not break them. Not necessarily break them, but bend them to His kingdom. Now, there were some interests and things I had when I was a teenager, 17-year-old, that never really fit, and set them aside and never really missed them. But some people are gifted in music. I watch some people play piano, and it's just, man, I wish I could play like that. But you know what? He's him, and God's using him for that. And And I don't know, the piano player guy might think, wow, that guy's got a great camp ministry. I wish I could do that. Well, I'm me, you know.
Right.
You know, where God has planted us, that's where we grow. The gifts God's given us, that's what we use.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, what is it that, um, so for you on the field, what is it that you see maybe as the greatest need in regards to missions or ministry? And I know that your ministry is missions, and so it's kind of
Right.
your perspective is more on the mission side. But what is it that that you see as maybe a really big need in regards to ministry slash missions where you are?
Okay. That's a very good question. And once again, I'm going to try to distill this into as best we can here. First of all, I want to explode a myth, and that myth is that Brazil does not need more missionaries. And when I was raising support, I actually heard this. Sometimes there was one Q&A question. Yeah, what would you say to the person who said Brazil doesn't need more missionaries? Um, and so it's very common. And so research will come out. You know, Brazil is 25% evangelical. You know, well, so let's talk about this for a minute. Brazil is 25% evangelical, depending on how you define evangelical. And when they do the surveys, evangelical, they include groups like Jehovah's Witnesses and so on, and those are somewhat fringe. But in Brazil, there is also, and in the United States, you're familiar with the health and wealth gospel. In Brazil, we have that on steroids. To the extent that when people here in Brazil hear the word evangelical, I'm talking about rank and file Brazilians, when they hear the word evangelical, their mind automatically goes to the health and wealth people because there's about three denominations that dominate the evangelical scene here in Brazil because they have big TV programs, big media outreaches. They're seriously wealthy. The biggest one, their leader has a mansion in Miami, and you even see some of his churches ministering quote unquote to Latin people in the U.S. and other countries. So huge here, the prosperity gospel. And if you're not familiar with that, I'll define it really quick. The prosperity gospel says God wants you to be healthy and wealthy. And if you're not healthy and wealthy, it's because you're doing something wrong. You're either there's a demon attached to your life, or or you're not giving money to the church, or perhaps both. And so, if you give seed money to the church and participate in their services, which are big exorcism services, quote unquote, we're expulsing demons and all this kind of stuff. Then you will be healthy and wealthy. And if you do all that stuff and it doesn't work, well, it's because you lack faith. It's really sinister, and it has nothing to do with the actual gospel. And unfortunately, Brazil is the evangelical world is characterized by that, and it's even seeped into denominations which normally would not preach that, conservative denominations, but because it's so dominant here, you hear it. I've been in churches of other denominations that where I should be hearing the word of God preached, but I hear the prosperity gospel preaching in, you know, God wants you to be healthy, God wants you to be wealthy, and so on and so forth. So that that those surveys are misleading. Now, ministry has changed. So when my colleagues who were our pioneer missionaries in our particular mission, we've been here since the 1930s. And so when our mission came in, Roman Catholicism dominated, and here were the Protestants coming in with their Bibles under their arms, and they were persecuted actually. And so their main focus was Roman Catholicism. Nowadays, we still minister to a lot of Roman Catholics, but we're also ministering to people who've grown up thinking that they're evangelicals, but they participate in one of these churches. And so the gospel that they've received has been grossly distorted. Grossly distorted. One of my colleagues put it this way: now we're trying to give the gospel to the evangelicals, and it kind of works better in Portuguese because evangelho is the gospel and evangelico, and so it's kind of a play on words. Works better in Portuguese, it's the truth. So when someone comes to my church, for example, and says, "Oh, I'm an evangelical," I'm here. Okay, but do you know the gospel? You know, that's
Right.
because you don't. A lot in a lot of cases they don't. I can tell you stories of like times I was speaking to like groups of evangelicals in different contexts and explaining the gospel, and they were debating me, saying, "No, it's not the case. That's not the way it is." Yes, it is. Biblically, and so a lot of people have grown up evangelicals and not believers. So anyway, there's that. The second thing, there are large swaths of Brazil that still have no real gospel witness. So if you're to come here to São Luís is in the state of Maranhão. I could take you to many communities where there is no effective gospel witness. Right here in São Luís. Right, I mean, right here in the state of Maranhão. And so there's work to be done. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to train Brazilians to do that work. But there's also lots and lots of room for people to come as from other countries and come alongside our Brazilian brethren. And our Brazilian brethren are here. Yes, we want this. We want people to come alongside. They also want to take up the responsibility and do it. So there's a tremendous need for that. There is a desperate need for theological education, which is here in São Luís. We have good seminaries. Our denomination, Regular Baptist, we have good seminaries here in Brazil. However, we're going through somewhat of what evangelicalism in the United States is going through, and that is, we've seen several of our good conservative seminaries folding in the U.S. And here in Brazil, they're getting smaller and smaller, and it's harder and harder. And so, what's having to happen is the same thing that's going on in the U.S., and that is local churches are having to take up the slack in terms of theological training, which is maybe where it should have been in the first place. But that's a whole other podcast.
We'll have to have you back.
Yeah, so basically, what our church is doing is what our church, like our churches here in Maranhão. We'll use the example. We have our association here in Maranhão. We have 7 churches, 7 works. Not some of our, a couple of them are church plants, but we banded together our pastors and set up a little Bible institute. And set up a curriculum that teaches the basics of theology and Bible doctrine and practical ministry abilities, and we're teaching those guys. And so right now we have 8 students. We'll never be accredited. I don't care. I don't want accreditation from the government, from the state. Don't want it. Doesn't bother. Don't care. We'll never be a university. We'll probably never even have our own campus. We have a room at one of the churches, and we have a nice big screen TV and so on. Never really have our own campus, but what we will have are young guys wanting to train for ministry, and hopefully we'll be able to provide the ministry of our church. Like our church plant right now needs to start thinking about calling a pastor. Calling a pastor is one of the roughest things to do because it's hard to get people to come here to this part of Brazil, and hard to get them to stay, and so. It's a big challenge. So someone who could come down here and help us with theological education would be so welcome, just so welcome. You can say, Andrew, the only thing I want to do is theological education. Come down here, you will have more work than you can handle for the rest of your life. So all kinds of wide open fields. There's others, but those are our 2 big things. We have areas where we need pioneers, and we have theological education. And in this part of Brazil, those are the 2 big things that we need right now. So,
yeah. So let's say that there's someone who is thinking to themselves, man, I would love to be a part of that. I'm just not sure that's something that I can do. What advice would you give them to maybe encourage them, or for just some things for them to think about as they grapple with that? Because you never know what the Lord's going to do in a person's life. And like you said earlier, what he calls you to do, he'll enable you to do. But it's hard to take the step. It's hard to take the leap, right? And so what would you say to someone that's in that situation?
The first thing, I would say the same thing that I say to people young couples who are talking to me about getting married. and they tell me, well, we're thinking about getting married, but we're not sure if we're ready. And I tell them, you'll never be ready.
Right.
Really encouraging, I know, but you're never going to be ready. So if you're waiting until you're totally ready, you're never going to get married. So if you're waiting till you feel completely adequate for the mission field, you'll never come.
Right.
Never come. And there is value to getting as much education as you can in like before you come. But then there's also a value. I had some people counsel me to get my master's degree before I came full time. I'm glad I didn't do that. Now I'm pursuing. I have kind of an educational track where I'm going to get a master's education eventually, a master's degree. So I'm not disparaging a master's education per se, but in my case, I needed to learn, and the best lessons I learned were on the field. Now our mission board, Baptist Missions, throw out a little shout out and advertisement for Baptist Missions. They have a very good policy. Whenever possible, new missionaries, they put them when you get to the field. We put you together with older missionaries, so you kind of can get your feet wet without drowning,
Right.
And that's a very good. And we had that, and that for me was more valuable, I think, than any master's degree could have been. All right. So and it's because I was working with good colleagues and very patient colleagues. So that was that was a that's a huge plus and a good policy. I'm sure other mission agencies have similar policies, but our mission agency has that policy, so it's wonderful. So that's the first thing I would say. You're never going to be ready. Don't let feelings of inadequacy keep you from doing God's will. Keep you from taking taking the step you need to take. Another piece of advice I would do is this is something I don't tell young couples, just so you know. But with missions, you can do this. Try it out. Try it out. Come on a short-term trip, and not just for a couple weeks. If you're single, come spend some time. And our door is open. I just had a young person just a few minutes ago actually send me an email, and unfortunately, it didn't work out because I'm actually going to be out of the country the time she wanted to come and spend some time with us. However, as a general rule, our door is open. So, Pastor or Andrew, I'm thinking that maybe God's calling me to Brazil. Some of the things you said, or some of the things I've been reading, or so on, and I want to get to know what missions is like. I'm not sure, but I want to know. Come spend some time with us. We have actually the room that you see behind me. We're actually kind of redoing it. It serves as our guest room. We're making it so it'll be more comfortable as our guest room. Spend some time with us, shadow us, and see what we're doing in the ministry. We'll make sure you get to spend some time with just Brazilians. Start on the old Duolingo Portuguese, and so you can come down and at least say hello and I'm hungry and where's the bathroom? The essentials, and then and spend some time with us and get to know. That's what did it for me. 2 months shadowing a missionary. I'm sure I was a pain in the neck and to him, and I'm sure his life would have been much more convenient without me. But he made that investment, and I've told him a number of occasions. Everything that's going on here is because you guys made that investment. If there's anything good happening here, it's because of that. And so I'm more than willing to make the same investment. And eager to make the same investment. So if you're interested, do that. If not, here in Brazil, a lot of mission agencies, our mission agency has several different programs. You can go to bmm.org and look there. They have several different programs aimed at giving people experiences on the mission field. Those are very good, and you can take full advantage of those. And maybe you spend a couple weeks or a couple months with a missionary, and you say, you know what, this really isn't for me. This is not where God has gifted me. Well, that's good. The worst thing would be for you to spend 3 years raising support and come to the mission field and then find out
Right.
that you weren't called. So if you can do that, it's not always possible, but if you can do that, I would highly recommend it. And the other thing is whether through Bible college, I know a lot like our mission agency will require at least 4-year Bible college degree. Um, I believe it's a 4-year Bible college degree they require. Uh, but whatever advantages you have where you are to do two things. Number one, to get profoundly into the Word and to serve in ministry capacity. Do those. Take advantage of those because that will prepare you for what you're going to encounter on the mission field. And remember that when you're on the foreign field, you're dealing with all of the issues that you deal with in your home country in the ministry. And on top of that, you have the fact that you're in a foreign culture using a different language. And that so if you can get the basics of ministry and the Bible, just profoundly in the Word, um, that will help you because then you'll only have to deal with the culture part of it. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
If I expressed that well. And there's the other thing, and a very wise missionary said to me as I was coming to the field, he said, raising support, he said, listen, whether you like it or not, and whether it's a good thing or not, when you come to the field as a foreign missionary, you are automatically given status. It's not ideal, but it's the reality. And so you better have the Bible knowledge to match it. And that really that hit home because at that time I had some work to do. So it's very important. It's never left me actually. So the more you can be in the Word in preparation, the better.
Yeah.
We need people to come down, and because there's so much doctrinal confusion, we need people who come down who are doctrinally clear. That's very important. So I guess those are my brief answers. Once again, this could be a whole other podcast.
Sure. Yeah, I'm asking some really broad questions, so I'm really setting you up for a not a great situation. So
no, that's fine. The broad answers, broad questions get broad answers.
That's right. This may be taking a step a little bit broader than the last one, but well, no, it's a much shorter question to answer. What is it that a person needs in order to do what God wants them to do? Whether that be a missionary, whether that be a like an institute, theological teaching, whether that's a teacher, whether that's a stay-at-home mom that God has said, hey, your job for the next 18 plus years is to disciple your children, and
which is an awesome, incredible, and hugely essential responsibility in ministry.
Absolutely. And
so yeah.
So what is it that and you can fill in the blank. It doesn't matter what the exact thing is, but to a person who understands that they are on this earth for a reason, that God has given them a purpose, what is it that they need in order to do it?
Okay, the big thing, the first thing they need, the big one is a word that's really out of favor these days, but it's obedience. So if you understand, this is something God wants me to do, all right, then there's no question I'm going to do it. I mean, well, I might not, when God talked to Moses in the burning bush, he said, "You're going to do this," and Moses come up with a whole bunch of excuses. I'm not gifted, and so on. And what did God say? Well, I made the tongue. If you think I can't give you the ability to speak, and so you say I'm not gifted in this area, I don't have, well, you don't believe in God saying you don't believe in my power to enable you to do this, So obedience, maybe even before obedience will be faith, just belief. Okay, I believe God, and so if God's telling me to do this, then I believe it, and so that I'd say would be number one. Just and I'm convinced, we haven't talked about this, but the number of missionaries worldwide, and it's not just Brazil, although Brazil is a prime example. I know we talked about this when you were here. The number of missionaries that just has fallen off in in the 20 years I've been here. And so, and it's, well, the demographics is changing. I think I'm convinced that the core issue is a lack of obedience, because I refuse to believe that God is not calling people to missions. I refuse to believe that, which leaves only one solution: that people are being called and they're not going.
Right.
Only one option. So
And it comes
that's
back
number one.
to your conviction there, the refusal to believe that's biblical, because you go to
Yeah,
the Great Commission. We're not
yeah,
here
yeah.
to sit on our loins. We're here to serve, and we're here to preach the gospel. We're here to
Right.
disciple and to teach them to observe all things that the Lord has commanded us to do. That's our job. And
And if and if the things give, well, I just believe God's called me to serve in my home country. Okay, wonderful. Then why aren't you?
right,
You know, because I don't see that either. Churches are closing. We have some very wonderful supporting churches, and many of our supporting churches are growing and dynamic and so on. But to be frankly honest, there are sometimes we've gone supporting churches, and Itasiata and I have come away from the church saying, if God doesn't move, that church is not going to be here on our next furlough. You know, so and in some cases, God has moved, and we've been grateful to see that. But you know, um, if everyone that wasn't coming to the mission field was actually working in the United States, the situation in the United States would be a lot better. We wouldn't have Bible colleges closing for lack of students,
right,
but we do have Bible colleges closing for lack of students. So that tells me that it's a malaise, a spiritual malaise that's deeply infecting the American church, and so we really need to pray for revival and pray that God would stir the hearts of His people for missions, not just here in Brazil, but in other parts of the world as well. Um, the other things I would say in answer to your question are downstream from that.
sure,
Um, so after faith and obedience, then come things like perseverance, uh, which is a biggie, and then come attitudes of maturity and humility. Um, Nothing tests your humility like you graduate from Bible college and sometimes even seminary, and then you come to a context where you're and you're versed in the original languages in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, and then you come to a context where you can't communicate on a third grade level. That's humbling. And you come here and you work with guys who don't have half the education you do, but run circles around you in terms of ministry. That's
right,
humbling. Um, and many other things. When you come down and think you've got the answer and you give the answer and people follow your advice and it's a disaster, that's humbling. And so, um, you know, and I could list, I guess, any number of character qualities that you need that need to be developed along the way. But those two, faith and obedience, are key, because those things will keep you going. When everything falls apart. You know, when your church plant is running 50 people one Sunday, and then something happens, and the next Sunday it's running six. Um, how do you put that in a prayer letter? You know, and what do you do with that? The only way you survive that is you say, okay, you know what? Um, God put me here, and I'm obeying Him, and the results are, at the end of the day, up to Him.
right.
So
Yeah, it comes back a little bit to the previous episode to this one. If you want to go back and look
okay,
at it, it's episode 7. I just took a few minutes and looked at Ecclesiastes 12, where
okay,
King
yeah,
Solomon
yeah,
says, "Let's come to the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His
mm-hmm.
commandments, for this is the whole
Yep,
duty of man." Like, this is why we're
yep,
here. Just
yep,
honor Him and obey Him. And if we
yep.
would, like, that would be our motivation. The rest will take care of
Mm-hmm.
itself in the specifics. We just need to be faithful to obey and to
Yep.
keep God first.
Yeah. And if we understand that, and we understand that God's goal, a very good book to read if you're interested in missions, you're not thinking about missions. It was written a while ago, uh, but it's a really good book. Is John Piper's? I think it's called "Let the Nations Be Glad" or "Let the Nations Rejoice." I can't remember. I always get that mixed up. But it's John Piper, so you can look it up. Actually one of the textbooks from a missions class in college, and I find myself often referring to the things it said. It's been a while since I've read it, but it's very memorable. One of the things he said is missions exist because worship doesn't.
Hmm.
In other words, there are people somewhere in this world that are not worshiping Christ. And if my desire is that Christ be worshiped, then I should be involved in some way in correcting that problem. And some people are involved by participating, by giving, by praying, and participating in secondary ways. And some people are actually involved by actually going to missions. But it's something we should all be involved in. And so it is an obedience question. You know, it's a cliche, but it's also true. It's the Great Commission, not the Great Suggestion.
Right.
So if you're not going, then how exactly are you involved? That's the that should be the question.
Right.
Anyway, that I think in a broad overall sense is the answer to that question.
Sure. Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic help, advice as well. Just as we come to kind of bring this episode to a close, I want to give people an opportunity to get to know you and your ministry, or even potentially say, hey, I want to follow along with what's going on with some of these church plants, this camp
Sure.
ministry. How can
Mm-hmm.
people find more information about you? And actually, I don't know if I ever told you this. One of my goals in doing episodes like this is to give individuals and even churches and pastors a place where they can go and kind of get a little bit of a behind the scenes conversational type of content to if they're say, hey, we're looking for missionaries to support or something,
Mm-hmm.
or someone that wants to give a gift to a missionary. And so how would people be able to get in touch with you,
Sure.
or even just to find more follow-up information about your ministry and what the Lord's doing in Brazil?
Okay. Excellent question. And the first thing they can do, and the best place to find anything about ourselves and our ministry, is at our website. Okay. And our website is justmyname.com. So it's Andrew Cummings, AndrewComings. Remember, that's Cummings as in the opposite of goings. There's no U, there's only one M, and there's an S in the end. So we don't make diesel engines, and all the different ways that it gets spelled. It's just the opposite of going. So AndrewCummings.com, and you can go there and you can find our website, and our website is completely full. It is I try to keep it updated weekly. I'm not always successful at that. Actually, I have kind of a weekly schedule, but over the past couple of months, we've been a little busy, so I haven't. But last week, I was able to update a lot. So the information you see right at the top of that website will be up-to-date information. The first article was one. So you can check that out, and we have information about the camp, updates about the camp, updates about the church, and I put posts there. If you're not really familiar with Brazil, I have a section there, the best of Brazil, and you can click on that and find all kinds of articles about interesting things about Brazil, and like from the culture to the music to places I've been and with pictures and videos, or places friends of mine have been with pictures and videos, all about Brazil. We have I do some writing on the side, so there's some articles there you can read and kind of uh, maybe those will be edifying. I do Bible studies, so I have a whole series on the Book of James, and right now I'm doing a Life of David, and we're up through where he slew and posthumously circumcised 200 Philistines. So that's my latest David article. And then, of course, news about the ministry. So that's all there. You can also we are on social media, and the best social media to follow if you're interested in our ministry and what's going on here is Instagram. And so once again, Instagram is just my name at Andrew Cummings, no space, just at Andrew Cummings. And so you can find it there and click on it and follow us there, and that gives you the best running day by day, sometimes hour by hour. Uh, uh, View of what our ministry is like. Like this morning, coming in after I took my son to the gym, and on the way back, just coming in our driveway, there was a big old boa constrictor. So we took a picture of that for everybody. That's that's the latest post on there. So enjoy. Um, so that's that. On our website, you will find something for Missionary Max. You'll see the words Missionary Max. Who is Missionary Max? Well, I wrote two books so far, and there's a third one on the way called The Adventures of Missionary Max. And basically, I tell people it's Indiana Jones meets David Livingstone. And so my idea was if archaeologists can have their own adventure hero, why can't missionaries have their own adventure hero? So I kind of it's fictional, it's fun, it's kind of geared toward teens, young adults, and kind of geared toward guys because I want guys to see missions as adventure. That's one of the things that did it for me when I realized, oh, missions is not boring. Um, and I've never been bored a day in my life here on the mission field. Never been bored a minute. So we have that there, and you can find those books on Amazon. You can the links are on the website, but you can find them on Amazon either as print books or Kindle, and read those if you want. Also, I would encourage people to check out our mission agency's um, website, which is bmm.org. That's bmmbaptistmissions.org, because they have a ton of resources and a ton of people, some really good people. They're at it's called the uh, Global Ministry Center, GMC, Global Ministry Center. Their headquarters in Ohio, and they have some really top-notch people there who can help you with specific questions and field placement and information about missions, missionaries, and so on. And there's also, if people want to contribute, our website. There's a link, but the website links to their website, so you can go to their website and find us and contribute online, and that's it if you're interested in that. Um, and then there was one other thing I was going to mention. Oh, yes, email. If you want to send me an email, my email is really easy. Also, I try to make these things easy. It's Andrew, my name, at, and then my website domain. So it's my email is connected to my website domain. So Andrew at andrewcummings.com. It sounds somewhat narcissistic, but my idea was to make it easy. So I figured that would be the easiest way to remember it. Andrew at andrewcummings.com. And feel free to send me an email. I'd be happy to answer. If you have any questions about what we talked about here, or are interested in getting to know Brazil better, or any questions about our ministry, feel free to send me an email. I would be happy to answer it at my earliest convenience.
All right. Well, thank you for giving us all of that. And if you all enjoyed this episode today, be sure to go and follow him on social media, Instagram, as he mentioned, and check out his website. He's got some cool stuff there. I've seen some of the articles, read through some of those as well. It's really neat insight into life in Brazil, and on top of that, missionary life in Brazil, looking at it through that lens of ministry. And so it'd be an encouragement to you. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to also give it a like. That would help a lot, just to help promote the content. If you're also if you're listening on a platform like Spotify or Apple, it gives you the ability to write reviews or kind of do like a star, 1 to 5 star review thing. If you'd be willing to do that, that would also help as well. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for spending some time and having this conversation with us. It's been a lot of fun
Well,
for
thank you.
me, and hope is for you as well.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us. I mean, this is a this I enjoy doing this. I think this is my third podcast of all time, and so it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it, and be sure the folks there at Open Bible, be sure to give them a big hug for us. We really
Will do it.
appreciate them. We enjoy it when you guys come down, And when we go back to the U.S., we always look forward to going to that church.
Well, it's
So
always a blessing to have you. So
tell the folks there we said hello. A big hug from us.
I'll do that. And on that note, you mentioned this is your third podcast. I have a feeling we're going to have to do more because, like you said, there's some of these questions that it's its own podcast. I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea. We need to talk about that.
Yeah.
So we'll have to do this again sometime.
Whenever you have a subject you think, well, that's relevant, give me a call. We'll
All
do it.
right.
I love it.
We'll do it.
All right.
Well, again, everybody,
And
thank
take
you
care.
so
God
much
bless.
for watching the show or listening to the show. Hope it's an encouragement to you. God bless. Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to Venture Together so you don't miss anything coming up. And if you haven't already, follow us on our social media channels to keep up to date with the show. Stay in the Word, and we'll catch you next time.